VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We're talking about the post-Week 6 Minnesota Vikings, who are now 2-4, which if you would have told us, 2 months ago, would be like blah. But after beating the Bears and keeping the season afloat, we're like, all right, we'll take it. Justin Jefferson will be back in hopefully 3 games, and we'll see where the chips lie and get cooking there. See if there's something to salvage of this season or if it's just a steady march to the offseason and draft order. I'm not sure what to make of it yet, but that's what we're going to talk about today. The Vikings won 19-13 at Soldier Field on Sunday, and that was the same score they had during the 2020 season. It's an odd score. And one quote from Kevin O'Connell, to me, stood out in particular after the game. And it wasn't an extraordinary quote. I'm sure he says it all the time or something to the effect. But he said, our best football game is still out there. And yes, that's coach speak, especially for O'Connell. But my question is, when? When will that show up? I have talked ad nauseum about this show, or on this show, about the Vikings season to date just being a disjointed group of sessions of good and bad things. Nothing ever seems to click at the same time, and hence you have 4 losses, and when you win, it's ugly. So what I want to chat is about this Bears win, a little peek at the 49ers, and then we'll lean into the 49ers stuff fully this week. But out of the gate, on our little 15-minute episode or so, I have to tell, especially any of you newcomers to this show or to Vikings football, for the life of me, every Vikings game at Soldier Field looks like the one that occurred Sunday. You should just expect any time they play at that building, any time they play on that surface, it is going to be a slop fest. It's going to look buffoonish from both teams. And usually when you get up off the couch or you leave the party that you're at, you feel rotten about a win. Every game like that at Soldier Field, that's how it goes. Even the 1998 Vikings won there by just 3 points. The 2009 Vikings, which are probably the second best Vikings team of my lifetime, lost by 6 in overtime there. And then the 2020 Vikings won, or 2017 Vikings won there by 3, which was kind of a pivotal point of their season to get cooking. But if you never learn anything again on this show, VikesNow, just remember that when the Vikings hook up with the Bears at Soldier Field, between both teams, whether one team is 8-1 and the other is 0-9, it's going to be gross, and you're going to wonder after that game, is this team any good? Even if they are. Or right now, if you're like, God, I don't know if they're any good. It really doesn't matter how you win there because every win or loss there feels the same. Just a survival fest and advance. So the season was kept afloat. And one thing that has dawned on me, especially with Jefferson out on Sunday and then these next 3 games, possibly more, is we're facing this prospect of having a defense-first enterprise or organization for at least the next 3 weeks, mainly because Jefferson is out. All of a sudden, the Vikings, per DVOA, rank 13th in the NFL on defense and 15th on offense, which, we'll take it. You would think that a team with those metrics would be closer to 3-3 or 4-2, but here we are at 4-2. So I think one of the unsung parts of the last, certainly 3 weeks, even against the Chiefs, the defense held its own, is that on the fly, the Brian Flores defense is doing the trick. There was a couple of those games where they were blitzing out the wazoo, and it didn't even matter. They were blitzing without getting pressure, which is usually a death sentence, and it was against, for instance, the Chargers and Justin Herbert. But I think we're looking at, until Jefferson gets back, it might be up to this defense to right the ship, and then we're sitting here with our fingers crossed, hoping they do enough on offense and keep it consistent enough to keep going, because the Vikings won very much on Sunday because of defense. There was somebody on Twitter I was briefly arguing who was like, well, they couldn't even stop Justin Fields and Tyson Bagent. And I was like, well, they did. That's just the thing. They stopped both of those guys. I think they had 113 passing yards altogether, 3 turnovers, no touchdowns. That's the very definition of stopping quarterbacks is what happened with the Vikings against the Bears. So get ready for this. The Brian Flores defense is starting to mature on the fly, and with Justin Jefferson out, it's this inconvenient or convenient pivot point for it to grow and almost be forced into it. Now, it doesn't help that Marcus Davenport apparently has a high ankle sprain, and he'll be out for probably a month, probably as long as Jefferson, if not longer. I don't know. I don't know if they have the juice to go out and sign like Melvin Ingram or Robert Quinn or one of those guys. I don't think Frank Clark wants to play on a 2-4 team. But you might need to, or hope that this version of DJ Wanham stays in the house, because the first couple of weeks without Davenport, he and Patrick Jones really didn't get off the schneid. The Vikings, Chase, they still have their best game out there. I think a lot of that has to do with the fluidity on offense. So the first half, the Vikings offense, I think all of us, KJ Osborne was the straw that stirred the drink in the first half before everybody kind of disappeared. It was like, all right, well, yeah, this looks pretty good. And then in the second half, nothing could get going. Let's get that out of the way. There were more drops from the skill position players. Alexander Madison didn't look overly impressive. I can't remember where it was exactly in the game, but Cousins had that sweet pass on, was it 3rd and 19 or something, to Hawkinson. Tough catch, but you would think that the richest tight end in the sport would get it. But the Vikings desperately, I don't care if Jefferson's out or not, they need fluidity on offense. And the biggest problem on Sunday, and I'm going to get to this in a little bit, but I'll touch on it now, was the third downs. They were 2 for 13 on third down, which is a very Vikings-Bears Soldier Field stat. But it prevented anything from getting humming, was that they couldn't stay on the field. Now, I don't recall there being tons of 3-and-outs. I think there was one there was certainly the one after halftime. So somehow they avoided that. But on most meaningful third downs on offense, it was, not going to do it today. And this was against the Bears defense that this year isn't any good. Usually we look at the Bears defense and we're like, ay caramba, this is going to be a slobber knocker. But this iteration of Bears defense really wasn't too daunting. So somehow, some way, the offense first head coach, the former quarterback, Kevin O'Connell, he must get the mojo flowing so that the offense is fluid, that it's not herky-jerky, it's not disjointed, that when the Flores defense is playing great, well, the offense is like, we're cool, we'll take it easy, we'll go 2 for 13 on third down. That has to stop happening if you want to salvage this season and, effectuate a little wild card playoff push, because the Lions have probably already run away with the damn thing in the NFC North. And another thing that O'Connell needs to do, and this spans back to the start of his career. It's really weird that his best game as a head coach was his very first one. I guess the Bills game was wonderful, but that was even shocking in its own regard. But it remains strange to me that O'Connell's very first game was his best one. But what he desperately needs to correct, say it with me here, is that eventually, hopefully this Monday night and the Sunday after that, they need to fix the time of possession woes. Every box score I pull up this year, and even bled into last year, let's go see how the time of possession ended up. This week it was the Bears, 35 minutes, to the Vikings, 25. Even last year when the offense was doing somewhat well, or in games this year, minus the turnovers, it's the other team always has the ball for at least 10 minutes more than the Vikings. And you might say, well, hey, that's a boomer stat. Nobody cares about time of possession. But it matters. I'm telling you, go look at the time of possession for any good football team in the last decade, and they're not ranked 29th in the NFL. It's because usually when you have the time of possession, you get to dictate, and your defense stays off the field. And when you're leading, you're running the ball a little bit to wind down the clock. But these Vikings, under O'Connell, just cannot figure out the time of possession. It's like they're always in a hurry to get to the line of scrimmage, which I guess is fine. But then it's like, it's third down already. And somehow, somewhere, some way, they need to be the victors of this time of possession. There should be every other game you look up, and it's like, hey, the Vikings are at 36 minutes. The other team's at 24. Hey, they're at 33, and the other team's at 27. No, every game it's the Vikings on the short end of the stick. Now, against the Bears, what they did do was keep this season afloat. 2-5 is surmountable, especially because there's only 3 games until Jefferson gets back. It's not very fun. San Francisco's on its way to Minneapolis, but at 1-5, that would have been completely, accelerating all of the trade talk, if it's not here already, about, Kirk, even though Kirk says I'm not effing leaving. Danielle Hunter trade talk. Danielle Hunter is playing quasi-defensive player of the year right now. If they had been 1-5, that's probably what this show topic would have been about today. Was where's Danielle Hunter going? Because the Vikings aren't going anywhere. But suddenly at 2-4, there is signs of life, and there is no signs of quit from the players, the coaches, at all. When you watch some of the tidbits on Vikings.com or their YouTube stuff, that's a team that looks like it's 6-0. The way that they're hungry and excited and, ready to get this thing on track. It doesn't feel like, certainly, that O'Connell has lost the locker room or anything of the sort. But if you are of the opinion that the Vikings' best game is still out there, like O'Connell says, you needed to get to 2-4 last weekend rather than marinating at 1-5, because you could have probably put a fork in a 1-5 team. So I ask you this, winding down the show, when do both sides of O'Connell's operation connect? The Brian Flores defense is getting somewhat good in the last 3 weeks. It looked really good against Bryce Young, against Patrick Mahomes. It did the best that it could. It certainly wasn't good, but it didn't get exposed by 37, 40 points. They held the Chiefs, 27? And that's decent, especially when you fumble the damn thing on the first play of the game. And then against the Bears, against Fields and well, first of all, I was told all summer that Fields is, the king. And then the Vikings clamped down on him. He got hurt. Tyson Bagent came in, looked like a moron. The defense is starting to hit its groove, and it's really cool to know that because most of the deadly quarterbacks on the schedule are in the rear view. Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes. Now we'll get Purdy, and then in December you get Burrow. Those are the biggies. And the Vikings now, with most of those guys behind them, the defense is starting to get pretty good. So I agree with O'Connell about chasing the best game, and I am desperate to learn when both sides connect. When is there a game where you don't go 2 for 13 on third down? When is there a game that you don't lose the time of possession battle by 10 minutes? And then if those two things occur, did the defense also show up? Or was it one of those ones where Justin Herbert threw for 405 yards? Eventually, and maybe it's this year, maybe it's next year, there has to be a time when everything comes full circle and, they don't have a bunch of fumbles. The offense cooks. You don't have tons of 3-and-outs. The time of possession doesn't suck. And by the way, the defense looks pretty damn good. And those will be the games when you get to go on a little win streak, because they certainly do. So I'll reiterate the third down, 2 for 13 was downright sinful. Time of possession, losing that by 10 minutes. It's horrible, but still, you leave Chicago probably because they're a bad team with a victory. You get your first division win of the season. You're 1-0 in the division. The Packers are, 2-3, and you play them in 2 weeks. So there is time to, turn it around and rattle off some wins and not be dead in the water. But like I've been saying for, 6, 7, 8 weeks on the show, you actually have to do it. I'm sick of talking about fixing the turnovers because they would have already done it by now if it was such a big priority. And then the final thing I'll leave you with is it's really kind of comical that if you're so the Vikings haven't lost at Minneapolis, so Metrodome or US Bank Stadium, to the San Francisco 49ers in 31 years. The last time they lost was 1992, and that was at the Metrodome. And since then, they've won 6 consecutive home games against the 49ers. If they keep that streak alive, there is a reasonable path that they will look at the standings, look at the newspaper on Tuesday morning, and they could be in the playoffs temporarily because they would need these things to happen, which are not unreasonable, then they could even be predictable. If the Vikings beat the 49ers on Monday night, and before that, the Jaguars beat the Saints, the Buccaneers beat the Falcons, the Giants beat the Commanders, the Broncos beat the Packers, and the Steelers beat the Rams, that will put your Minnesota Vikings at the 6th or 7th seed. I think it's the 7th seed with a 3-4 record and big smirks on our face because we've bemoaned how bad they've looked mostly bad to start the season. And, a lot of folks are just looking at draft order next year. Can they win the Caleb Williams sweepstakes? So to reiterate, if these things happen before the Vikings Monday Nighter, Jaguars over Saints, Buccaneers over Falcons, Giants over Commanders, Broncos over Packers, and Steelers over Rams. You see any ginormous upsets in that list? I did not. And then the Vikings do beat the 49ers. They're going to be temporarily in a playoff seed, if you can believe that. All right, tomorrow I will be back with Josh Fry. We're going to ask him, we're going to ask him probably some 49ers stuff. And then later this week, I have Tyler Island coming on again. He'll be here with Dakota, one of our guests that we've had on about 4 or 5 times. That's what we got. So you have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you Wednesday with Josh Fry. Skol, baby.